Hello, welcome to Post Colonial Space. I'm Masood Raja, and what follows is an excerpted clip from one of my longer webinars. So, what I've decided is that sometimes when people ask really interesting questions, I will pull out that particular part of a webinar and make it available to you as a short clip so that if you don't have time to watch a 1 hour webinar, you can at least watch and listen to the brief exchanges that I usually have with people who attend my webinars. So here is one such clip from a recent webinar. I hope you enjoy it. I think Althusser's insights into ideology really give us that kind of materialistic criticism and the skills involved in it. Now, before I go in, Aaron, I would like to answer your question from your journal. Now, do keep in mind, I didn't claim that the critic need to be objective. I was trying to highlight how the new critics assumed the critic's role, and in that, objectivity was one part of it because they were trying to make it scientific. But we all know that even when we are writing a paper without using the first person pronoun, and we are using vocabularies that sound objective, a lot of our subjectivity is invested in that practice. And now after reading Ideology, we already know that even when we are performing an objective identity, that identity is in so many ways over-determined by the ideology that we are in. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, so going over to Althusser. Now this essay, even when it was published, I think the book is called Lenin and Philosophy, it was published as a tentative, unfinished product, right? It was like thoughts on the edge, but it has gained a lot of prominence because it was first of the major Marxist essay that relied on Lacanian psychoanalysis and attempted to answer the question of ideology. Now, ideology, I always say, and the lecture also explains it, is that in the classical Marxism, ideology is what we call, it's connected to knowledge, right? And what does that mean? That's why we call it the epistemological model of ideology, because in Marx, ideology is this systemic veil or systemic hiding of the truth perpetuated by the superstructure, by the dominant classes, because of which the workers, instead of seeing the world from their own point of view, see and experience the world from the point of view of their oppressors, from the point of view of the capitalistic class. And so the question in Marxism was how to undo that ideological filtering so that the workers can see their own lived experiences from their own class interest and not from the class interest of the dominant classes. And that was the project that a lot of people try to answer. Lenin tries to answer it by suggesting that there will be a vanguard that will be created. That's what we call vanguardism. And this vanguard's job would be to educate other workers about their own exploitation. Eventually, the centralized Communist Party takes on the role of educating the workers. Now, if you've read your Paulo Freire and other leftist scholars, they would assign that role to education, right? But deep down in all that thought, there is a certain centered human subject that is imagined. So the main criticism of it is the sheer humanism of it, because if we are reconciling alienated labor to their true selves, then we must also imagine that there is a true self in here, which if we undid the ideology will be reconciled with, right? So the question of alienated labor, then what is alienated labor? So in order to theorize that, what Marx and others theorize is that we as human beings are naturally productive. We want to make things, right? But in the capitalistic society, in order to live, we go and take on a job which we were not meant to do just to sustain our material existence. And since we are doing something that is automatic, that we are not interested in, that we don't want to do, we are alienated from the project of our own labor. So disalienation or disalienating labor would be to remove them from that bondage and to reconcile them with what they were meant to do or wanted to do. But that presupposes a central human subject with a core, right? And that becomes problematic in post-structuralism. So what Althusser is then trying to do, and you can go into more details of his concept of ideology in my lecture that I've already recorded, what he's trying to answer is two questions in that essay, right? The first is that a capitalistic society has two functions, right? It must produce commodities, but then it must reproduce itself. And by that, what he means is that it must reproduce its productive structures, who does what is assigned to whom, right? Who can do what kind of a job? How do we decide that in a democratic capitalistic society? Because we can't tell people, your father was a plumber, you must be a plumber too, right? No, because our role in life is not decided by birth, right? And he says that that is done ideologically. In order to theorize that, then he theorizes the question of the human subjectivity, but also that there are two ways power or superstructure works, right? Through dominance, which he takes from Antonio Gramsci, right? And through hegemony, but he gives them different names, right? The concepts come from Gramsci. There's a footnote in that essay where he acknowledges that. And Antonio Gramsci, you all know, was an Italian Marxist. So what he's saying is that the repressive state apparatuses are the one at the disposal of the state, police, the justice system, the legal system, incarceration, all the things that we fear that if we don't do the right thing, we will get in trouble with the law and all that. Those are the repressive state apparatuses. But what Althusser is suggesting is that the state most of the times functions through ideological state apparatuses, right? In which, in a way, if we come through Gramsci, we give our willing consent. And he gives the example of education, right? The system of education as a mode of ideological state apparatus, because it does a few things. First of all, it disciplines us, disciplines our bodies, makes us the part of the project of socialization, right? Two, it also assigns us our place in society. Depending on what we study, where we study, we internalize the possibilities that we have, right? Now, that is done through education, that is done through ideology. Now, keep in mind that Althusser does suggest that the fear, the threat of violence is always there. The state has it at its disposal, and it's also at the back of our minds. But most of the times, what we do in life is materially determined by this apparatus, which is ideological. Now, that takes me to the question of apparatus, right? Apparatus for Althusser is material. That means that it's not theoretical, it exists, right? It has institutions of power, a body of law, right? Police, justice system, a system of bail and incarceration. All of that is material because it's a dispositive, it's a system. And when we are caught, when we are overdetermined by a certain ideology, our performance is also material because it shapes our actions. It determines for us what we can and cannot do. Now, do keep in mind that Foucault studied with Althusser. If you read Theory of Discourse carefully, especially, the early Foucault, the archaeological Foucault, like how is the body disciplined? He's drawing from this, okay? There is no doubt in my mind that the discursive, think of what Foucault argues, a discourse is material, right? And it has material consequences. That's exactly what Althusser is saying for ideology. So overall, what can we do with this? we can pick up a novel, right, and read it to understand, what kind of ideological overdetermination is at work in the novel. What does the author take for granted, right? Think of like any conservative novels, if Atlas shrugged, right? What is the logic of the novel? The novelistic world, what ideology is it in? It's in an ideology which believes that people with wealth are more useful. They're the ones who carry the society and its burdens, and everyone else who relies on them is non-productive and is a burden on society, right? For us to follow the logic of that novel, we can't just do that at gut instinct. If we agree with if Atlas Shrugg's main narrative, we agree with it because ideologically we are aligned with what it's saying. Now, the same novel, if offered to me at a young age, uncritically, can also then determine which ideology can I be a part of. So education then can do that, right? These are like some of the uses of the term. Now, another crucial point, and you can see my cat running around in the back. Another crucial point in this essay is also how Althusser discusses the question of ideology and human subject. Now, at one point he says that ideology is the means through which individuals make the world intelligible to themselves. That's what he calls the ideological transposition of the real. Now, in order to really understand what transposition is, we have to know Lacan. And we have to know the difference between the symbolic order, right, and the imaginary order. Now, we know that in the imaginary order, we are prelingual. And we have somewhat access to the real because we see the real and think it is real, even though that is a fiction, right? But when we enter language, we cannot really access the real non-ideologically, right? Or non-linguistically, right? So in order to explain his ideology, what he's saying is that ideology doesn't overdetermine us per se, but it's the mode through which, it's something through which we understand the real. We understand the world, right? It makes the world intelligible to us. So our understanding of the world then is deeply ideological, right? And so if we take the concept of the subject in Althusser, what we know is that what he's saying is we are all born subjects because we have a last name, we are expected, our parents raise us, so we are human subjects. And then as we enter the symbolic order, our subjectivity is stabilized and constructed through what he calls interpolation, right? And how are we interpolated? We are interpolated through the act of hailing, which is ideological, right? A police officer stops you, hey, you, that's the example he uses. At that moment, when you turn and acknowledge that hail, you immediately know who you are, right? That is who you are. That I am Professor Masood Raja. The cop has just called me. It immediately concretizes your idea of self to you. That self, that subjecthood was already given to you, and then it stabilizes within a given ideology. And then what he also suggests is that there is no outside to ideology. So there is no non-ideological place or position, since that place would be the imaginary order and the real, and we cannot access the real without language, without ideology. So all then we can do is move from one ideology to another. So this is kind of my take on the essay.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this brief clip. If you are interested in the longer version, the link will be in the description and you can watch the whole webinar. Thank you so much for your support. And as always, if you have any questions, any concerns, you can always post them in the comments and I'll be happy to respond to them. If you have a moment and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so now so that you get timely notifications of whatever is happening on this channel. Thank you for your support. Stay safe, and as always, from me to you, peace and love.